created. In that day, Yahweh God made earth and heaven. Now, no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet grown, for Yahweh God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no man to cultivate the ground. But a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole surface of the ground. Then Yahweh God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And so the man became a living being. And Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden towards the east, and there he placed a man whom he had formed. And out of the ground Yahweh God caused to grow every tree that is desirable in appearance and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became 4 rivers. And the name of the first river was Pishon, the one that went around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. Now the gold of that land is good, and the bdellium and the onyx stone are there. And the name of the second river is the Gihon, and it is the one that went around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is the Tigris, and it is the one that went east of Asher. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Then Yahweh God took the man and set him in the garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. And Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, "From any tree in the garden you may surely eat, and from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat from it. For on that day you eat from it, you will surely die." And Yahweh God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make for him a helper suitable for him." And out of the ground Yahweh God had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought each to the man to see what he would call it. Whatever the man called the living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field, but for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him. So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib which he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This one is finally bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. Therefore man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." One of the interesting things in all of this, because what we're really talking about is kind of from 18 on, is that this is the first time that God declares that there is something not good. So everything we've seen so far, God has said, it is good, it is good. But in verse 18 it says, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. So he will make a helper for him. This may be to emphasize kind of what he's about to do. So everything's good, 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 not good. So if you're reading that, it might stick out to you, or someone's telling you, you probably would emphasize, and it is not good. And so then you would think like, so what's not good? For man to be alone. But one of the interesting things to me is that, I mean, if you, as a man, if I see a problem, what do I want to do? I want to fix it right now. I don't want to wait to fix it. I want to fix it right now. And so, interestingly, God says it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And what does he do next? What does God do next? Well, he makes all the animals come before him. In a sense, the way, I don't know, it's just my personal opinion. As we go back, in right here it says, "And out of the ground God had formed." I wonder if it's like this, the point isn't the order of things here. God has created the animal. Whether the animals were created first or man was created first, it really doesn't matter. But God had created all the animals, had formed every beast of the field and every bird and so on. And so he brings them before him. So that's kind of, to me, that's kind of odd. Like, here's the problem. All right, let's talk about animals. Yeah, well, that's weird. But so he gives God his first task, and what is he to do? He name them, and it says, the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. And so, how long do you think that took? Now, I don't know. I didn't look this up because I don't think it really matters, but how many animals do you think there were in the beginning?
Plenty.
There was plenty. I mean, now, today we think of things in what we call species, right? And so, like, even within the dog realm, there are species of dog, but they're all dogs, right? So when you're talking about a dog, you're talking about a dog. A species is what our modern mind has decided, well, we need to be very specific. So it's this kind of dog, but it's still a dog. And so in a sense, it wouldn't be as many as we might think of, because maybe he'd say like, well, that's a cow, and it looks a lot more like a bison to us than it does a cow. Whatever. There's different kinds. And so perhaps maybe that's what he's doing. But this is going to be a lot of work, isn't it? This is a lot of work for man. And so his first job, he does by himself. The first job he does by himself. And it probably took him most of the day, I imagine. I mean, now it's interesting to think, this are side thoughts. God told man to name the animals, but God gave man words. Or at least the ability to think and communicate, right? So Adam's creating a language on the fly. Well, that's a plig. Oh, okay. Well, everybody will call that a plig from now on. Anyway, I just think that's kind of funny. Just that out of nowhere, man is speaking and calling things with no context. Now if you see a fish that's called a tiger, like a tiger barb, why is it called a tiger barb? Well, because we know what a tiger is. That means a striped thing. But man created up names without, in a sense, from seemingly no context. Very interesting. Anyway, side thoughts from James. So the first task that man is given is one that he does by himself. And so at the end of that it says, and there was no but for Adam there was not found a suitable helper. Was it that Adam is looking for a helper? No, I don't think so. But Adam is alone, and he's got a job, and he's doing it all by himself. Yes.
I tend to think that God was showing man that there was not a suitable helper for him. Because, that sentence, I will make a helper for him. Now he brings all the animals to him, shows him all the animals, he names them all. And then the next thing he says is, there wasn't a suitable helper. So he was looking.
Yeah. Maybe he was.
He wanted man to see that there's no suitable helper.
Yeah.
The horse would have been pretty close. A dog would have been, they were very good helpers.
Yeah.
But that's not what God
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot in that, and I think to help, in a sense, God's trying to reveal to man also his need for a helper, for need for people, for relationship. The next thing in verse 20 it says the man. So we talked about that, and there was not found a suitable helper. So now when Adam names all the animals, what does that say about man with relationship to animals? We've kind of already talked about this, but what does it say when someone names something? What does that mean?
Claim it.
They've claimed it? overseeing it. Authority. So when a man or when a person names something, it demonstrates a kind of authority. And when, like, for example, when God changes the name of a person, it shows his relationship to them, doesn't it? Like, when a child is born, besides the fact that, like, somebody's going to slap their bottom to make them cry so that we know that they're breathing, right? What's the first thing that we've probably already spent days upon days, most people, spending time trying to figure out the right name for a child. And then still you're going to mess up, probably. Everybody likes to create unique names. My least favorite choice of ours is Micah's, only because we created his initials, which are MRS, which is Mrs. And that always, I was like, why didn't I think of that? Anyway. But we spend a lot of time picking names that are meaningful to show, maybe in some ways to show who we want our children to be or whatnot. So naming is important, and it shows authority and stewardship, like a care for things. So no suitable helper was found among the animals. I guess we may have answered this, but I guess we already have answered that question. But this kind of highlights the unique nature of what God is about to do. Everything's different. He's created all these animals. He created everything out of the dust of the ground, right? He created everything from something. But then he's going to do something unique and different with woman. And in a sense, some have said that this is, in a sense, even more than the climax of God creating man, the climax of creating woman for man, a relationship. So why is it not good for man to be alone? This is an open-ended question. I don't even... Just what do you think? Why is it not good for man to be alone?
It can cause people to not feel good about themselves.
It has effect on our emotions, our feelings about ourselves. What else?
Are we talking about man or are we talking about
People. I'm talking about people.
just
Yeah. Man in the general sense. Isolated. Yeah. And just feeling like, have you ever felt isolated? And it feels like you feel, I don't know how to describe it. You feel empty, and like there's something you need, and maybe you don't even know what it is. You're longing for something. What is that thing that you long for when you're isolated? Relationship.
Somebody share the language.
Yeah. Someone to talk with. When you're done at the end of your day, when you've been working for a long time, whether you're a man or a woman, you get home. If you don't like to talk, if you're not a talker, maybe this isn't the case, but lots of times people get home from work and they talk about what happened at work. They talk about things that have been going on, decisions they think that they need to make, and they talk about what's going on. And then, so at the end of the day, Adam's done with his work, and there's no one to share it with. There's no one to share his work with. The humor of, like, did you see that thing over there? That thing has a super long neck. What is that about? Tony?
I was just going to say, when I'm alone, it's easy to make things up,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's about myself or other things. And so I'm trying to think of something that might have been, if
For-
we didn't have it already.
Right.
It's easy for us because we already have
relationship, yeah.
about being without and not knowing that wouldn't necessarily be as bad as having it and then losing it. You know
Right,
what I'm saying?
right.
But it's easy to make things up in my head necessarily true, you know, and there's no safety.
Yeah. So, is this statement about man being alone only about marriage?
Solomon said they have a good return for their labor.
They have it. Two people have a good return for their labor.
So fits it into the work
Right.
formula.
Right. So more than one is always helpful. It's like two's a company, sometimes three is a crowd, depending on what you're doing, right? Sometimes it's really helpful. So being alone isn't really just about marriage, it's about life. We need each other. Why do we meet together on Sundays? Is it only because Jesus rose from the grave? Or is it because we need together to be acknowledging that, to encourage each other to walk on? As if we could do everything we do here on Sunday by ourselves, except for encourage one another. How can you be encouraged if you're not around someone to encourage you? And how can someone else be encouraged if you're not there to encourage them? We are together for a reason. We need to have relationship. So there is a time to be alone. Often it's good to spend time in prayer alone, to seek God alone, to focus your mind and your thoughts. However, man is not meant to stay alone. People need each other. So, verse 21 through 22 says, "So Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib which he had taken from the man into a woman, and he brought her to the man." So where does God get what he uses to make woman? From man. There's lots of things. I tried to think about, anyway, where is the rib? Where is a rib? It's on the side of our body. What do the ribs do? They protect. They give us structure. Just can you imagine if you didn't have ribs? It'd just be really weird right here. I don't know. Like if you had just a pole between your head and your hips, that would look really weird. I'm sorry. So your ribs hold and create a structure here. Do you know ribs? The rib is actually a term that's used for architecture, the structure of things. It's meant for protecting, and so God takes this rib from man's side, and he creates woman, which is different from everything else that he's done. Everything else that he's created, he took from the earth, and he made. And here we see that God makes woman from man. So what is the significance of this act of fashioning a rib into a woman? What do you think?
It actually makes her special.
It makes her special. I mean, it's in a sense the most unique of all creation. Guys, remember that, okay? It's the most unique of all creation. What else does it say?
It says that there's a specific purpose. I mean, all the rest of them, we know that they have purposes.
Right.
But she was made for a specific.
So man was made for a specific purpose, but God made his helper, who is also man. God says in the beginning, like when he created man, he said, let's make man in our image, male and female, he created them. And so man generically means man and woman, but also he created man, and then he created woman. And so they have unique roles and purposes. And so what is man? Well, what is woman's role in this? It's to be a helper. Now, does a helper mean that she is below him? No. Where does she come from? His side. So what does your side? What do your ribs do? They support you, don't they? Without your ribs, I should have probably asked my wife this. She knows all sorts of stuff about the body and how it works. But without your ribs, I don't think you'd be able to stand upright very well. Your back you couldn't breathe. There's all sorts of things that just wouldn't work properly if we were just a bone. We wouldn't stand upright like we do. We would look very different. So our ribs support us. And so what is a woman designed for? The purpose of supporting not just a man, but that's her role. And so it's not a subordinate, it's not inferior. And there's some other things I want to point out. So this word helper isn't just used for woman. It can't be subordinate because it is used to describe God. In Psalm 121, verses 1 through 2, it says, I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? My help comes from Yahweh, who made heaven and earth. So to say that word would mean below man would mean to say that God would be below man when he helps him. Now, God, when he came as Jesus, submitted himself he submitted himself, he lowered himself, he humbled himself. But that's not exactly the same term that we're talking about here. But that's an idea. Like part of that is humbling ourselves. So again, ribs, this location, it implies strengthening, supporting, and it's complementary. So a woman was designed as Adam's counterpart and equal. The choice of the rib is symbolic and emphasizes that a woman was created not as subordinate or superior to man, but as an equal partner, sharing the same essential nature, bringing complementary qualities to their relationship. The rib's location close to the heart and vital organs suggests that it is intimate, a life-sustaining nature of the relationship between man and woman. So, what is Adam's? I didn't put this in here, but what is Adam's response to when he meets? What is Adam's response when he meets Eve? That made me think. Well, there's a song.
Original Hebrew says something like hubba hubba. Looking at animal parents all day long.
Finally, someone who looks a little bit more like me. Because I didn't write that down.
Make sure
I
you
need to.
thought about that at the beginning, that this creature looks like him. I mean, there's no mirrors.
Right.
I know.
Well, that's maybe he looked in the river. You know.
2 legs. I have 2 legs. That's
That's kind of cool.
point out.
Like, hey, she's got arms like mine. She's got 5 fingers. We go together. Hold on just a second. Okay. And I think this is really kind of interesting. So what does he immediately says? I got my Texan in there. This one finally is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, because this one was taken out of man. And in that, like, I don't know if you read that, like, finally. I'm reading from the Legacy Standard Bible, which is basically the New American Standard. But finally, finally, like, I've seen all that you've created, God, and it is good. But I don't know. I don't know if I can do this alone. Finally, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. You get kind of the idea of an excitement, a joy. And he calls her woman. And so what is... So this morning I was just... As I was finishing up my notes, I go back through and kind of rehearse, and then I'm like, something's missing. And I was thinking, I looked at the Hebrew word for woman. And I thought this was interesting. The Hebrew word for woman is, I'm not going to pronounce it right, but I don't particularly care, Ishisha or something like that. And it is the exact same spelling, and as far as I can tell, the same pronunciation as a burnt sacrifice. And why I think that's interesting is because there's a relationship. He had to sacrifice something. Something was sacrificed for him to have a companion, to have that relationship. And in the sacrificial system, there's actually part of sacrifices is to restore relationships, to keep relationships. There's feasts that they do together to have relationship with each other, to restore broken bonds. And so I think that just kind of struck me as interesting. So for man not to be alone, a sacrifice had to be made. Part of him had to be taken. He had to give up something for himself for this to happen. Any other thoughts before I continue on?
I was just thinking about the fact that God had performed surgery on this man. I don't know what kind of pain he had to go through.
You put him to sleep.
I never thought about that until just now.
A deep sleep.
A deep sleep. But when he woke up, I mean, we still have nerves. I mean,
Yeah.
he's still a man, and he lost a part of his body. I've had a tooth pulled before, and that's very uncomfortable and actually very distressing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how weak he was when God brought her to him.
There may have been something to that. Yeah.
I mean, the whole scenario we don't know anything about, but it says that God brought her to the man.
Yeah.
It was a presentation.
Right.
I think that, I mean, who knows what kind
Yeah.
of ceremony he might have.
Well, and also in a sense, so so he's brought all the animals before him, and now he's brought woman before him. Last of all, the first is important, and the last is important. Last of all, he brings the woman to him, and he may have been in pain. He may not have been in pain. Well, we don't know, but it's interesting again that God created woman in this way. I'm going to see if I can read this properly. I don't know if it... Sometimes I write things and it doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to go ahead and read this. As I was studying, it seemed to me, not surprisingly so, that God created man and woman in this way, not only to create an equal helper for man, but for man to choose to have her as an equal helper, not a subordinate. And the reason I say that is because what does he say? He calls her my bone of my bone. When he gets to name her, he calls her woman, which basically says, like, I'm going to have to sacrifice for you. I'm giving up something for you. So he names her, but he doesn't name her lower. And that's important because all the animals, he names them, and that shows an authority over them. But in this sense, it seems like he's naming her in a way that is not, again, subordinate. That he's in God gives him the choice, as he gives us always choices, the choice to bring her alongside him with his duties. So they're not alone, they're together, and that he gets to choose to call her woman. And God does not name her specifically woman, but that he gets to call her that. And that's just something I was thinking about. And then finally, therefore man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So from this last part, there's kind of four basic principles or basic elements of marriage that we can see here. What is the first thing? A man shall leave his father and mother. Now, what is the purpose of a man leaving his family to be with his wife?
He needs to be closer to his wife.
Closer to his wife? Why leave your family?
It's a restart.
It's a restart. So your family, through your upbringing, is your primary relationship. Those are your closest relationship. When you get married, who becomes the closest person to you? Your wife, your spouse, your husband if you're a woman. So that becomes a primary relationship in your life that you're sharing things with. So man, this means establishing a new relationship, kind of a restart, as Tony said. And the marriage takes precedence. That doesn't mean that we abandon our family. It just means that the primary relationship, our daily relationship, is going to be with our spouse rather than our parents or other family members. Then the next part I think is kind of interesting. And cleave to his wife. This word cleave could also be termed hold fast. It implies a permanent attachment and faithfulness. Also, interestingly, this word in Hebrew is also used in the context of other covenant relationships. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 20, Yahweh your God you shall fear, him you shall serve, and to him you shall cling. By his name you shall swear. And so this idea of clinging, this is like a covenant relationship. This is a bond that should not be severed. That it is a bond that if it were to be severed, it tears and it breaks things. And so it's extremely important. It is, but it is a covenant relationship. And let me go back. And then next, they shall become one flesh. And so the idea is that they are now completely one. They share their thoughts, their emotions, their spiritual lives together, that everything that goes on in their lives should be shared together. And that can be difficult for some and easier for others. But the point is that they're to be one and work at being one. And that's not always easy. Do you have your hand up?
Did you ever stop to think, just think, how long it took man to see every animal, every bird in the sky there is, and give them names?
I can't imagine. God can do lots of things. Maybe he had to make the sun stand still that day too. How long would it take to name all of those animals? It would have been a laborious task. He probably got tired of his mouth talking. I was telling somebody the other day when I worked for Apple at a retail store, I've never felt like I have a really prominent Texas accent, but after talking for 8 hours a day, I sound a lot more like a Texan. And I not that he would, but anyway. That would have taken a lot of time. And so he would long for that relationship with someone to share his time with, to share all that he's going through. But this one flesh idea, we don't lose our identity, but we gain someone to enhance our identity. How many times especially as a parent, like I start to say something and then my wife says, really, James? Or sometimes it goes the other way where I say, hold on, honey. It's usually the other, it's usually the first. It's usually me like, okay, I'm sorry. I got a little bit overbearing there for a moment, like a whole bunch of times. But anyway, and so that unity that we have, that we work together, we have a common goal, a common purpose, and we're working together. And sometimes it's hard to come to that point, but that should be the goal of our marriages, to be able to be unified. And they were not ashamed. They were not ashamed in this. And at the beginning, it's one of those things when you read to kids, like they were naked and not ashamed. They're like, you said that word. But and it's so weird. I understand this is weird, and maybe it's uncomfortable to some people. But this tells us that there's an innocence in creation. In the very beginning, there's nothing to be ashamed of. And in a sense, the need for clothing comes from that. We now understand that there's a reason to be ashamed. And so that changes everything. So there's no hiding. And so in this unashamedness, they can share everything, and there's nothing they don't need to hide anything. There's nothing to get in the way of her. What? There's no guilt. There's nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hide. So to finish this off, I want to connect it back to Jesus, as I try to do each week. The fact that a man named woman set some kinds of roles and relationships to man and woman. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 through 32, it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought to also love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a mystery. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. And so this very beginning creates an image of God's relationship with his people. Paul reveals that, in a sense, the ultimate visual of marriage, this type, is an image of the relationship of God and his people, Christ and his church. A marriage is that living illustration. And every Christian marriage should, though, we are all humans and we have we fail from time to time, should reflect this greater reality. And this should be the goal, to be able to reflect this to each other and to those outside, so that they would see our relationships and how we go through difficult times. So we, as the church, are called to work alongside Christ, not for a separate purpose, but the same purpose as the one who created us, to declare the wonders of God. So in the same sense that Jesus revealed to us who we are to be, that's the same relationship of a husband and wife. We have one goal and one purpose in mind. We need to be unified in that and work to that. Christ's role as a husband shows to be loving, sacrificing. It's an unconditional love. Leadership, but this kind of leadership that we see as Jesus is a servant. He comes to serve and to protect, not to lead the way in the sense of everybody's behind him, but that he lifts everybody up. And he sanctifies to make his bride holy. And that's what we are to do, to nourish and to cherish, to care for. The church's role, or the bride's role, is to submit voluntarily to the leadership of the husband. And just as the church is to do that with Christ. To respect and honor in the relationship, in that role, to be unified together. And before, I don't know if I have enough time to touch this last subject, but so that's the image of what our relationship should be as a marriage and as a church to Christ, to God. And one thing I feel like it's important that we talk about before we end this is that the perspective on divorce that Christ gives us. So the Pharisees came to Jesus testing him. This is in Matthew chapter 19, verse 3 through 9, saying, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce a wife for any reason at all?" And he answered and said, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." And they said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce and send her away?" And he said, "Because your hardness of heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery." So in Malachi chapter 2, verse 16, it says God hates divorce. And divorce destroys relationships. It creates barriers. Now, is there a time that divorce is probably right? There is, and Jesus tells us specifically when that is. There may be other times where it might make sense, but specifically Jesus says when there's sexual immorality involved. But even God shows that his love is beyond just that. In the book of Hosea, what do we see? God tells Hosea to marry a harlot, and that harlot is unfaithful to him over and over and over again. And what does he do? He goes and redeems her over and over and over again. Now, that's a hard thought to think about. But the point of this to me is that that this is an important relationship. It is a very important relationship. That is worth sacrificing our lives for. God gives us his love in this way, and we're to reflect that love. Not to say that this is not easy. And when Jesus is asked about this in other places, they said, "How this is so hard? How can we deal with this?" And Jesus says, "Well, not everybody can." But a side note is sometimes we treat divorce almost as if it's an unforgivable sin. And the Bible does not say that. And we should not act that way. That is not what the book says. That's not what God says. And that's not how God treats people. So it is forgivable. Is adultery forgivable? It is. We know that it is. Jesus says to the woman caught in adultery, "Go and sin no more. I don't condemn you. Choose to live the right way." So all of this to say, I didn't get to do one last point, but it's not good for man to be alone. Woman was created from man's side and for his side so that we could work together for the same purpose, the same goal. Marriage is a relationship that changes our priorities to focus on this relationship. Marriage is a living illustration of Christ's love for the church. And the last part that I didn't get to talk about is just we need to stand for our convictions on this matter. Focus on the biblical pattern, but also be generous and kind to people who don't understand our perspective. You can't expect people to listen just because you think you're right, just because you may be right. And we need to be generous and kind and let people see our love for one another and our love for Christ. Thank you very much.